What's up, everybody? I thought I would give my opinions on the most recent bans and errata update list, but this became something so much more. It became more of a rundown of maybe every format we've had since the MHA reboot. But before we dive into things, we got to talk about the Stark Dark Open Series down at Counterspell Games in Jacksonville, Florida. They're going to be having $2,500 in the standard tournament as prizing, which is very, very cool. But also a retro 1K event. Rochester Retro is going to be the rule set, and they're going to have 1K for that as a side event. So a lot of cool universes going on. And please, if you've got the time, if you're in the area, if you can make it down there, go support these grassroots events, because as I'm going to talk about in this video, they may be more important than ever. So Universes is approaching the release of its 13th set since rebooting in 2021. The first set of My Hero Academia was a simplified base set with heavily reduced mechanics and simple character abilities. For some, this was considered a betrayal of the very essence of UVS. Many yearned for the murky board states and prolific interaction of previous iterations. More recognized the core gameplay of attacking and blocking remained intact, and more still found their introduction to the deepest and most rewarding card game ever printed. Personally, I think the game shines the most when the mechanics of the game allow cards to fill various roles based on the situation. Cards that mess with the top card of your deck are great for both guaranteeing checks and potential card draws, for example, or how cards that care about the top card of the discard pile have a ton of ways to find a card there, whether by discarding momentum, sacrificing foundations, or discarding cards from your hand. When you've got a few too many synergies, though, these things go from filling various roles to be a critical mass of the same role, right? So with 12 full sets and tons of supplementary products, the metagame has evolved plenty over the years. But which meta has been the best meta? Naturally, as humans, we're going to have different biases towards and against different flavors of the game's history. But is there a correct answer to this question?
Yes, there is. It's a meta where I win. Whenever I'm winning, that's the good meta. It's about skill. I win when I win, the game is good, but if I lose, it's obviously the meta shit.
So the first place I looked was the top cut deck list from years prior, but it quickly became obvious that you can cherry pick different top cuts from similar eras to fit any kind of narrative, really. You've got top cuts where there isn't a repeat character until 13th place, despite us all knowing who the boogeyman was. Similarly, the format where the only character that mattered was Younger Toguro saw a bunch of characters you probably didn't see in a top cut before and probably won't ever again. And then you look at a top cut like Collinsville, and you see repeats of a couple characters, but I can point out how this version of Ghidorah is all in on discarding your hand, while this version of Ghidorah is maxing out Blue Flame Torment to afford its greedy attack lineup, and this version is somewhere in the middle. It goes without saying that people will have a different goalpost for when a meta feels diverse, but it appears that the public only cares about character diversity. The symbol diversity does not seem to matter to the average player, and strategy diversity is pretty hard to justify as well. If a Rodan is on the all or void symbol and their main strategy is to live forever, does the way they eventually kill their rival mean it's a different strategy? How different is the game plan when you're sculpting until you have the perfect combination of attacks regardless of how it's being done? Conversely, back in the day, people popped off anytime a different symbol or character was showing up in top cuts, even if the decks were primarily the same composition. In the beginning, the question was mostly if you were playing punches, kicks, or ranged attacks. And you were basically beholden to whichever symbol had the best combination of those keywords. There's a 6-month stretch where Momo becomes fully realized once other decks lost Frog Lashing and she gained Cannon Blast. Jiro also finds her footing as a deck to be reckoned with, and the Home Run Comet decks get added to the meta. Sprinkle in your rogue decks with hybrid attack lineups like Denki, Ochako, or Sero, and you've got a pretty good mix. But a deeper dive into the list will find a lot of common themes. Decks back then were almost defined by whether or not they even played the defense, regardless of how well a character even could. Identifiable win conditions are shared amongst well performing decks, and they follow a very similar pattern of having a big payoff after passing as many attacks as possible. The more stun landed along the way, the better. A small step forward in time, and we hit what many consider their favorite metagame with the arrival of the big three. That's right, Eraser versus Mirio versus Overhaul, the three flavors of repeated 100% Smash format. And I know what you're thinking. What about Amajiki? And yeah, Amajiki was pretty good. And he had a unique face-up momentum gimmick. And you didn't have to play string offense or cheat progressive or ramp foundations. Just a tiny little check bonus. What a based character. But it's about this time that a lot of you have probably fled to the comments typing about some favorite character of yours that hasn't been talked about yet, characters that may have persisted through multiple metas over years and never got truly power creeped out of the format. And I think this is where the trend that stronger characters have more flexibility than weaker characters really becomes apparent. At the tail end of this overhaul dominant format, you've got Earth overhauls playing punches and kicks in Kirishima cards of whatever they like. You've got the UK overhaul, which is evil symbol and plays all of these cards. I guess it's kind of a throw thing. I don't know. But it's got the really important defensive staples that really weren't catching on just yet with Runaway and Barrier Shield and things like that. So that's pretty cool. And Twisty Surroundings, the fair version of vertical maneuvering equipment. The meta-relevant Godzilla characters have topped with all kinds of attack packages and feel ever present in top cuts. Well, except for this most recent US Nationals. But I think where the problem lies is that before, all the meta defining characters were trying to be their own version of the best string offense deck. The defense against these decks were fairly uniform, and the levels of interaction were pretty standard across the board. Identify the correct attacks to block in the string. I apply breakers or card pool clog where it matters most. And momentum denial was important against the wider parts of the field. And maybe the hardest information to process is the stat resets. Every symbol had its own version of a stat reset. Most decks ran them, but not at maximum quantities. These cards didn't feel good with the tempo of the game at the time, oftentimes coming out of the sideboard even. But a consequence of diversifying the number of strategies seems to be more generic and powerful defensive options. Instead of resets, decks are opting for one-size-fits-all answers in the main board. What is even scarier are the decks hitting critical mass and stat reductions that effectively reset every single attack. Those decks are pushing things to the extreme. There's very little middle ground anymore. Rodan and Tarion and the former VME abusers were pushing people towards single attack OTKs. The damage reduction spam is allowing decks to change the risk reward of building your entire hand and getting massively far ahead. And the aggro decks with maybe one single defensive trick are seeing tons of success in these smaller tournaments of late. Which gets me to the crux of the entire situation. I think the meta optics and analysis are probably due to a shortage of players. Overall attendance is still down. The event counts are slowly coming back, but the MHA rebirth is firmly over. While there are lots of contributing factors, I think one sticks out above the rest. The game is hard again. All the successful card games outside of the big three are baby games. They are, to their credit, very simple and derivative. Now, I'm not hating necessarily. I like Star Wars Unlimited. I thought One Piece might have had something with Dawn being lands and Pokemon Energy sort of combined, and most importantly, not part of my main deck. But at their core, they are baby bigger number wins games. Bandai games are almost exclusively juxtaposing card advantage to be encompassing to all zones. Flesh and Blood takes the dynamics of UVS's attacking and blocking and reduces it to bigger number wins. The context of speed and attack zones is a huge component to what makes UVS not like any other game. So if you're still here listening to this, it means you are one of the survivors. You are one of the rugged who have endured and remain standing. It means you love the deep strategy, the unpredictability, and the challenge that UVS offers. And I think this format is looking a lot better after this most recent ban and errata update. I just hope AOT3 can keep that momentum going forward. But I think if you look back, the more things change, the more they stay the same.